A review of John Martin Fischer and Mark Ravizza's moderate reasons-responsiveness theory. The discussion of moral responsibility gives rise to various views on how a person should be held responsible for his actions, such as determinism, incompatibilism, and compatibilism. In compatibilism view, Harry Frankfurt provides a critique of the concept of alternate possibilities, which contains that free will is when humans are able to perform alternative actions or to do otherwise than the actions they do. Thus, the human being can be judged to be responsible for his actions. Frankfurt finds the possibility that humans can still be held responsible for their actions even though they cannot do otherwise. His critique has been defended by Reasons-Responsiveness view, who share the same belief as Frankfurt, namely that the question of whether humans can do otherwise is irrelevant to moral responsibility. The most influential argument in this view is initiated by John Martin Fischer and Mark Ravizza in their work entitled Responsibility and Control. Fischer and Ravizza initiated the theory of moderate reasons-responsiveness, or MRR, which contains the view that humans who have mechanisms that are responsive and reactive to reason can be said to be eligible for an assessment of responsibility for their actions. They also stated that the MRR theory is sufficient to be the basis of moral responsibility because it can explain humans' intuitive reasons for taking their actions. Fischer and Ravizza's claims regarding MRR theory have paved the way for the development of moral responsibility discussions marked by responses from various perspectives and challenges to MRR theory. This matter shows that MRR theory needs to be reviewed to provide readers with an understanding of the MRR theory along with arguments regarding its strengths and weaknesses as a basis for moral responsibility. This research used descriptive analysis method by providing data about the concept of MRR theory descriptively, starting from the background, ideas, requirements to several responses from other thinkers. I, as the author, also includes comments by synthesizing the data to give another view regarding the MRR theory. The idea of the MRR theory originated from the argument of Fischer and Ravizza that humans who deserve an assessment of moral responsibility are those who have guidance control. Guidance control is the control possessed by moral agents to be able to freely do their actions based on their own mechanisms without minding whether they can do otherwise or not. The mechanism itself in question refers to a set of systems in every human being that is used in the process of considering a decision before and when he takes his action. Therefore, Fischer and Ravizza believe that what is needed in the assessment of moral responsibility is the existence of guidance control. The concept of guidance control was then used as the basis for developing the reasons-responsiveness view. They initiated the moderate reasons-responsive or MRR theory by using an asymmetric comparison between the agent's mechanism components called reasons receptivity and reasons reactivity. A person's mechanism is moderately reasons responsive if it meets these following three conditions. First, the mechanism is regularly reasons receptive to reasons. Second, the mechanism is not really reactive to reasons, or it is weakly reasons reactive. Third, the operating mechanism belongs to the agent itself. For example, someone who has been diagnosed with kleptomania cannot be said to have moral responsibility for her action in stealing other people's things, because her mechanism is not weakly reasons reactive to reasons. She acts based on her main desire as a kleptomaniac. Her operating mechanism is also not receptive enough to reason because she is unable to control her own decision due to her impulse disorder. The MRR assessment does not really make a fuss about whether the universe is determined is true or not. If the mentioned determinism view is true and the mechanism of the agent has been determined, then the agent can still be judged responsible. This is because the object of assessment in MRR's view is based on the mechanism of moral agent, not because of the determined universe. This makes the MRR theory quite plausible because Fischer and Ravizza are able to provide a more reasonable explanation and result in a series of conditions used to assess a person's responsibility compared to previous discussions about the truth of the determined universe, which is too broad to be justified. Support for the MRR theory has actually made this theory even more criticized, so that it receives criticism and challenges from different perspectives. One of them is a critique by Todd R. Long in 2004 that an agent whose mechanism appears to be MRR can also be said to be morally not responsible for his actions. This is because there is a possibility that the agent's mechanism has been influenced or manipulated by external party before he makes his decision, so that the moderately reasons-responsive mechanism does not belong to the agent himself. Long's critique shows that it is very difficult for humans to be aware of anything that can affect their mechanisms, so false accusations are often made. This issue leads to a view of skepticism towards the assessment of moral responsibility, which has been conveyed by Gideon Rosen in 2004. In his writings, Rosen stated that we cannot determine with any evidence that this condition for moral responsibility can be met. There are too many reasons that allow a moral agent to be blamed even though the agent is innocent and vice versa. Likewise, in MRR, no one can guarantee and justify whether the conditions of the regularly reasons-receptive and regularly reasons-reactive mechanisms have actually been met in the person's mechanism. In the end, the assessment of the mechanism of the agents can only be in the form of speculation without definite reasons. Therefore, Fischer and Ravizza's explanation of the plausible conditions of MRR is not sufficiently reliable as a basis for moral responsibility. They also need to provide a reasonable explanation of how the assessment of the mechanism is carried out. The deliberative process of the agent's own mechanism as the source of his actions makes moral responsibility can be said included as a historical phenomenon. A person is judged to be responsible for his actions not only in terms of his purpose or reason for doing the actions, but also from how they can occur. Human may have free will and MRR mechanisms at one time, but is unable to control his will at a later time. For example, a man who was driving his car hit a kid who was riding a bicycle on the roadside. Later, it was discovered that the driver of the car was in a drunken state. In MRR view, the driver cannot be held responsible for his actions because the mechanism that was operating at that time is not MRR. He had no reason or purpose to hit the child, but at that time he was unable to control the steering wheel so as not to hit the child. Of course, this assessment sounds wrong. The driver's loss of control is the result of his own actions that occurred previously. In this case, for example, drinking alcohol, which resulted in him getting drunk and losing control of his own mechanism. Thus, the driver can still be held responsible for his act of hitting a child because his loss of control state of his own mechanism is a consequence of his own previous actions. The example shows that the chronology of an historical event is also one aspect that needs to be considered in the assessment of moral responsibility. This leads to stronger and more reliable arguments for assessing moral responsibility. However, the moral theory is quite acceptable but still not enough if it is used as a basis for moral responsibility according to its claims, since there are still holes in the MRR theory that need to be filled.